Hey, it's Krieger here, and in this video, we'll explore the deeper unconscious factors behind addictions, how this is ultimately a psychologically religious problem, and how the flow state might be the solution. And I know this was a weird statement, but I promise it will make sense. So my earliest memories of experiencing the flow state date back to when I was about 8 or 9 years old. So as a family, we used to attend this Baptist church every Sunday morning. And I remember being mesmerized by the music, completely absorbed in that moment. And it was very special to me. And specifically the lower frequencies. And I remember feeling them like very strongly in my body. And at times I just felt like I was levitating. And I remember asking my mother what was that, these lower frequencies. But she knew nothing about musical instruments, so I only learned what a bass was years later. So these early experiences had a profound impact on me, and I know they're a big reason why I decided to pursue music later in life. But a lot happened before I started studying music. So these experiences ended up being stored in the background of my mind, and I believe it was mainly due to a sense of isolation and also depression because for most of my adolescence, I found comfort in food and video games. And I probably spent about 6 hours per day playing, and I was constantly snacking throughout the whole time. So I guess it's no surprise I used to pack an extra 25 kilos. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because flow has a dark side. But before I get into that, I should explain that flow is a modern term created by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi for what Bill and James called religious experiences, Carl Jung called numinous experiences, and Abraham Maslow called peak experiences. So different names for the exact same thing. But to simplify things, Jung says that these numinous experiences come directly from the unconscious and they rapture the individual. So it's a very overwhelming experience, again, in which you feel its victim rather than its creator. So they have a compulsive nature and also cause a peculiar alteration in consciousness. The main problem is that the unconscious is immoral, which means we can experience flow with beautiful things like arts, music, creative endeavors, going to the church and listening to music, or be held hostage by our addictions. And that's why overcoming them requires such a deep understanding. Now, Carl Jung explains that the psyche has a religious function, which means that whether you're conscious or not, everyone has a governing principle in their life. So, in psychological terms, God is this organizing idea that shapes someone's entire life and also their fate. And of course, when we use this term God in psychological terms, this can be tied to religion. But when someone lacks meaning, it's usually because their God took the perverted form of an addiction such as workaholism, the greed for money, food, sex, substances, gambling, shopping, or the video games that took a great chunk of my life. So that's why overcoming an addiction involves finding a deeper sense of meaning and also altering the governing principle of our lives. So now we come back to Mihaly, because during his research, he discovered that people who had high scores in overall well-being and life satisfaction were also the ones who experienced the most flow in their lives. But there's a caveat, because we're not referring to passive forms of flow like drinking or eating, but active forms that require skill building like running, lifting weights, public speaking, programming, or any creative endeavor. So that's why if you're dealing with an addiction, the first step that must happen is to look for active forms of flow, as passive forms are not only inferior in their quality, but as we've seen, frequently lead to addictions. And that's why what helped me the most when beating my compulsion for food was joining the gym and starting to experience flow through intense physical exercise and learning to play drums. For the first time in my life, I started liking myself. I started liking what I saw in the mirror. So I felt strong, I built discipline, I dropped 25 kilos, and I learned that I could have objectives and achieve them. And playing drums also taught me about perseverance, but most importantly, developing a craft and being involved with music brought meaning to my life. But now we have to explore the crazy part of flow and why this matters so much when dealing with an addiction. So essentially, experiencing flow floods your system with feel-good chemicals, and you can basically produce your own drugs in endogenous form. So we're gonna go over the list of these endogenous drugs. So first we have dopamine, which can be compared to cocaine and amphetamines. So it gives you this intense energy, focus, excitement, it boosts motivation, and also enhances pattern recognition in the brain. We also have norepinephrine, which can be compared to Adderall or other stimulants. So this basically improves alertness, our reaction speed, and gives us a heightened sense of awareness. We can feel deeply embodied and in touch with our five senses. And then we have anandamide, which is also called the bliss molecule because it binds to the same receptors as THC. So we can basically produce our own weed. And this reduces fear, produces calmness, and also enhances our creativity. We also have endorphins, which are natural opioids, and they are much more potent than morphine. And this is what gives us the feeling of euphoria and also the blissful quality of flow. And finally, we have serotonin, which can be compared to MDMA. And this usually happens after flow and brings that sense of contentment, calmness, and that deep satisfaction. So I told you that experiencing flow was completely crazy. I mean, can you imagine producing all of these chemicals without the need of any other substance? And not only that, because we also feel more capable during flow and we are not subject to cheap pleasures anymore because this is all earned. Now we have the capacity to produce these things by developing a craft. And also, when we enter this space, we can change that self-defeating narratives, regain control, and experience a new version of ourselves. But to truly experience meaning, we must put the skills we developed during flow at the service of something greater than ourselves. That's how we can finally experience a sense of purpose. But to do it, you must not only transcend your narcissistic desires, but also exercise your moral capacities. So here's what I mean by that. A lot of people continue to engage in self-destructing and, dare I say, morally questionable pursuits because they are good at it. And when I say that, I'm remembering Walter White from Breaking Bad. So there's this iconic scene at the end of the show in which he confesses to his wife Skyler why he persisted and put everyone in danger. And this is the first time that he admits that he did it for himself, basically. So he says, I did it for me. I liked it and I was good at it and I felt alive. So the need for mastery is ingrained in our psyches, but our conscious mind must direct the process. We must cultivate our moral capacities because if we don't, well, we might apply our skills to become crime lords and start producing blue meth. So in summary, to overcome an addiction, we can start by pursuing active forms of flow through developing a craft, intense physical activity, creative endeavors, you name it. And then to find purpose, we must put our skills in the service of the greater good. And finally, you can learn more about how I access the flow state in my next video.